Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you to those who are watching and cooking after. That's totally fine. If anybody has any questions, you can ask them, ask them as they come up, put them into the chat. I don't think you can unmute yourselves in a webinar. So just put them into the chat or into the Q&A and I will pass them along. Is there any other housekeeping thing? I'm sure you all are aware that we are recording this, as I kind of said before, because some people like to watch after. We will post this on our website, probably also on Facebook and on our YouTube page, probably tomorrow. It'll go up or the day after. So if that's what you are waiting for, then that is what you can do. So I am going to pass the torch over to Danielle, aka the Crafty Hostess, although not the Crafty Hostess blog anymore, as she told me before. She's done programs with us before, so you may recognize her. She is on Facebook, she is on Instagram, and you can find her there. So I'm going to mute myself. I know how to do that. I do. Okay, so I'm muting myself, and I will unmute myself. So if people ask questions, I will just interrupt you and tell you.
Yep.
All right, there you go. Take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope everybody is having a great summer so far. I am going to walk you through a couple of recipes tonight using really super fresh summer ingredients that many of you might have growing in your gardens if you are a gardener like I am. One is a summer tomato tart, and the other is a yummy pasta dish that includes zucchini. And if you grow zucchini, then you probably have a huge amount of it growing right now. And so this is a great way to use some of that zucchini up. So just a little bit of background about me, if you're not familiar. I am a gluten-free baker and caterer here in Rockland County, and I do some work in Bergen County as well. I've been doing these cooking demonstrations and seminars, if you will, for the libraries in Rockland County for a few years now. And, I really enjoy it. And so if you have any questions along the way, feel free. I'm happy to answer, any questions that you might have. So we'll get right into the tomato tart first. This is a grain-free crust. If you are not grain-free or not gluten-free, you can certainly use any pie crust recipe that you prefer. You could even buy a store-bought pie crust and roll it out and use that instead. So I'm going to walk you through the ingredients for this pie crust. I'm going to do a cup of arrowroot. And arrowroot, if you're not familiar, is a starch that comes from a tuber plant. So it is a plant-based flour. It's very, very fine and powdery. It is very similar to tapioca, if you're familiar with that. I find that arrowroot tends to be a little less gummy, if you will. Okay, so it's a cup of arrowroot. If you don't have arrowroot, you could also use potato starch. I've used with this recipe. And in the notes that I've sent along with the ingredients, I give you the measurement. You're not going to do a one-to-one swap on that. That is sort of a tricky thing when you're baking with gluten-free flours. They're not always a one-to-one ratio for regular all-purpose flour. And so I give you the measurement for that if you're going to use that. The next thing I'm going to include is cassava flour. And cassava is also known as yucca, Y-U-C-A is how you spell it. And if you're familiar, this is a little bit darker and a little less powdery. This gives baked goods a really nice chew. And if you're familiar with the little Brazilian cheese breads that is made with cassava flour. It's really yummy. And then finally, I'm going to add some almond flour. I use a lot of almond flour. I love it. I even add it to my all-purpose gluten-free flour blends because it really gives a nice moistness to the baked goods. This I got online on Amazon, but I usually get my almond flour from Costco. And you want to use the super fine. This is a 1/4 cup, and then I'm going to add another. Let me do it like this. Actually, I should do it like that. I never cross-contaminate with the almond flour first. So just in case. Okay, so I'll put that over there. Let me move these over here. Okay, so that was a 1.25 cups. Let me get out my whisk. I also need 1/2 of a teaspoon of sea salt. Okay. And I'm just going to give this a quick whisk here like that. You could see it's really light and powdery. Okay. Now I am going to do this in a food processor because it will be somewhat sticky. If you're familiar with gluten-free flours, they tend to be a little bit stickier and definitely not the same as working with a regular all-purpose flour. Okay, alrighty. All right, and then the next thing I'm going to do is add, actually I'll add that at the end. I'm going to add 1 egg right in here. Okay. I'm going to give this just a quick pulse. And I like to do that because I like to add a little bit of the liquid up front with the flour. Otherwise, it tends to kind of like spill out of the food processor, and that drives me insane. Now, I'm also going to add 2 tablespoons of hot water. Now, ideally, you would use a thermometer, but because I want to get this done quickly so that I don't bore you, I am just going to add it like that. But really, it should be hot, like 110 degrees. If I was doing it not on camera, I would have microwaved or boiled the water and then taken the temperature of the water, but we don't have to do that. I'm going to give it another quick pulse, okay? And then the final ingredient for this really easy grain-free dough is a stick of unsalted butter. Now, I know a stick is a lot, but you know, I just feel like the butter gives it such a nice texture. If you can't do butter, you can use any dairy-free or vegan butter of your choice. You could also substitute oil. I would recommend a neutral oil. Olive oil would be too flavorful. You would probably want to do an avocado oil. You could even do a canola oil, which is not as healthy as avocado oil, but you could do that. So anything neutral. Okay, and then we're just going to turn this on. And you'll see, you know, it'll start to come together. And then I like to just go in and scrape down the sides a little. Okay, so that's pretty much what you want. Let me show you. Do you see that? You can, it's a little bit crumbly, but it should hold together just like that when you press on it and you hold it in your hands. You could add another tablespoon or so of water if you feel that it's too crumbly. but really it's a beautiful soft consistency. So what I've done is I've made one ahead of time, and I've pressed it into, this is like a 9.5 inch. I sprayed it. This has the removable bottom. So what you can do is make this ahead of time and wrap it well in plastic wrap and then stick it in the fridge. I made this ahead of time and covered it with plastic wrap and set it in the fridge. So it's all good. So I will save that for another time. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is make the filling that's going to go on top of this yummy crust. Okay, this is for the other recipe. Okay, so in here I have a stick of cream cheese, just plain old cream cheese, 1 stick of it, which is 8 ounces. And then I am going to finely mince, you know what, that's a pretty big clove. 2 cloves of garlic if they're on the smaller side, or if, you know, and 1 large clove, unless you really, really, really love garlic and can't get enough of it, in which case then you can add as much of it as you like. Okay. So the reason that I'm doing this filling is not only because it tastes fantastic, but it gives the tomatoes, which are the star of this recipe, a little soft little tasty bed, if you will, to lay on while they're baking in the oven. Otherwise, the tomatoes would just sort of make your crust a little bit wet and gummy. So you want to finely chop that, okay, and then throw it right in to the cream cheese. Okay, I will save that for another time. Okay, another thing that everybody has growing, if they're gardeners, fresh herbs, right? So we have tons. I love herbs. I use them all the time. I grow tons of them, and then I actually dry them at the end of the summer, and I put them in glass jars so that I have them, you know, all fall and winter long. So this is Greek oregano. Okay, and again, if you don't like oregano, or you know, you prefer to use, let's say, parsley, you can really change this up and use whatever combination of herbs that you like. Okay, I love herbs, so you know, I'm going to use like a good amount of them. Okay, I'm going to do that. And then I also have some thyme growing. Thyme is one of those herbs that really goes well with all sorts of dishes, including fish, because it has like a natural lemon, sort of herby lemon flavor to it. Okay, and you're just going to pull the leaves off like that. I mean, you know, honestly, the little stems at the top are so delicate that you can just chop them up and not go crazy with pulling every little tiny leaf off of there. It's not going to make a big difference. You could use dried herbs if that's what you have, but you're not going to get the same flavor, and you're certainly not going to get the smell and the aroma that you get from the fresh. Okay, so I'm going to throw those in there also. Okay, I'll save these for another time. Okay, sea salt. You don't want, you know, too much, just a good pinch, because we're also adding cheese to this. And then black pepper. All right, I mean, as little or as much as you like. You could even throw a little hit of crushed red pepper in there if you like. All right, I'm going to bring this over here. I am going to add, I'll probably just start with 1 tablespoon. This is just half and half. You could also use heavy cream. It just sort of helps to loosen this and it makes it mix better. And this is pecorino, grated pecorino Romano cheese. Pecorino is a sheep's milk cheese. I absolutely love it. This is pretty much what we put on our pasta. I add this to my meatballs. I use it almost in everything. It is much more pungent and saltier than Parmigiano. Parmigiano is a little bit nuttier. And then I'm going to add a little bit of mozzarella shredded, and then I will add more of that at the end. Okay. You just want to get in here. Now, I didn't mention that the cream cheese should be very soft at room temperature so that you can do this. Otherwise, you won't be able to work with it. I'm just doing it by hand. You could also do this if you wanted in a mixer, stand mixer, or using electric handheld beater. But if the cream cheese is soft enough, and this has been out for a while, so I was sure that it would be, you really don't have to, and it smells delicious. Okay, so we're just gonna bring our crust over here. Okay. All right, and this is going to go right on the top of the crust. Okay. Now, I find it easier to work with the crust when it's cold. So if you have the opportunity to make the crust ahead of time, press it into the tart pan and then refrigerate it for a little while or even overnight. Otherwise, if the cream cheese is not soft enough and the crust is too warm, it's going to tear when you try to spread this loveliness on here. And this does not have to be perfect. Okay, I'm just trying to get this all spread out. I like to try to keep it mostly in the middle with a little bit of the tart crust showing on the edges because it's pretty. Okay. All right. Let me just clean my hands here. Okay, so now the final component and the star of the show is the tomatoes. Let me just. Okay, another tip when cooking with fresh herbs is to wait until the last possible second to wash them. Otherwise, they tend to wilt and they lose some of their color. So you want to wait until the last second. By the way, these are from my garden. You don't have to come over, Ava. These are from my garden. If you can see them there, they are giant. I mean, some of these tomatoes, you know, they're at least the size of my palm. Okay, so these tomatoes are all from my garden. And what I've done, these are just beefsteaks. You can use really any type of tomato that you want. I've even done this with halved cherry tomatoes. The key here, because tomatoes have a ton of liquid in them, you want to put a few pieces of paper towel on a baking sheet, slice your tomatoes, and then sprinkle them very well with salt. Do one side first, let it sit for a while, like a half hour, then flip them over and salt the other side. And the reason that I do that is because it extracts all of, or not all, but a good amount of the juice out of the tomato so that it doesn't make your crust soggy. Otherwise, you're going to end up with, you know, soggy tart crust, and nobody wants that. Okay, and maybe I cut a few too many here, but you get the idea. Okay, I mean, that should be enough. This is sort of like an elevated, you know, version of like a tomato pie or even a a pizza. It really has some of the components of a pizza. The basil we can add at the end. We'll put a few pieces on now. And then I'm just gonna put some more of the shredded mozzarella on top. Okay. And I have an egg here that's beaten. I mean, you just want to go in and just on the part of the crust that's showing, just give it a little dab of the egg wash. It just helps it to brown nicely and protects it from burning. Okay, we don't have to get crazy with that. We'll put a little bit of the basil on now, and then, you know, I'll probably put the rest on at the end. And that'll just sort of bake in with the cheese and kind of permeate. Okay, so I'll leave that there. And then I like to, actually I might use this. I like to always bake on a cookie sheet, just because if something decides to spill out in the oven, I don't have a big mess. So that is going in the oven. I have the oven preheated to 375, and it should take maybe a half hour or so. I'll just keep watching it and I'll pull it out at the end before we wrap up. Does anybody have any questions so far? Actually, I probably you could also drizzle a little bit of olive oil on the top of that, on top of the tomatoes as well, or you can wait and just do it at the end. But because I put the cheese, I didn't add the olive oil. Any questions about any of these recipes and about this recipe?
Nothing yet so far.
Okay. So let me just clean.
I actually had a bunch of questions, but you answered them as you went along. So.
Oh. Okay. All right. Now, I am not going to worry too much about the board because there was nothing on here that I'm concerned about. No raw chicken or seafood or anything like that. So this next recipe is something that my great grandmother used to make all the time during the summer. And sometimes she would do it with zucchini, like I have here. And sometimes she would do it with yellow squash, or she would do it with both. But it was always some sort of summer squash with sliced onion and a tomato, red sauce. And then that would get tossed with the pasta. So I do have my pasta water going here. This is the spaghetti that I'm using tonight. You don't have to use gluten-free, obviously. This one is just one that I happen to pick up at Stop and Shop that I actually like. Okay, so I'm going to stick that in and let that sort of hang out and do its thing. I also have a large saute pan here with some extra virgin olive oil. And then in the back there, I have a very quick, simple marinade, basically. Actually, I didn't even put garlic or onion just because I wanted the flavor of the zucchini to shine through. So I kept that very simple. You could even just buy a store-bought, very plain sauce. This was just a pinch of sugar, salt, pepper, crushed red pepper, basil. That was it. And I just let it cook for a while. So what I'm going to do is start by sauteing. This is a half of a large onion. Okay. And unlike, a lot of pasta dishes where you chop the onion into small little bits, my grandmother always did it like this so that you would get almost like ribbons of the onion in with the zucchini, and it really makes the onion more prominent in the dish. Okay, and you can, you don't want to cut them too thick, but you get the idea. Okay, so I'm going to add these. Ideally, that oil would have been a little bit hotter, but we're good. Okay, and then I always add salt to my onions and garlic because you want them to sweat. Okay, just a little bit. And the other thing that I can't live without when I cook is crushed red pepper. I always have a supply of it on hand. I crush it usually myself. You can add as much of this or as little of this as you like. I like it a little spicier, but you don't have to if you don't care for it. Where did I put? Oh, here we go. Okay, so I also like to add the red pepper at this stage because it sort of toasts with the onion and the oil. Okay, so we're going to let those sort of hang out. This is not hanging. Okay, and we'll keep an eye on the spaghetti. Okay, so let's talk about the zucchini. You want them about this size. You can use, as many as you want. It depends on how much zucchini you want in the dish. If you're going to add a lot of it, then you want to add some more onion with that as well. But I like the zucchini that are a little bit on the smaller side and skinnier versus like those humongous ones, just because I feel like these are sweeter and they have less of that seed on the inside. These have been washed already, okay? And you want them to be all about the same size, right? So that they cook evenly. Let me lower this down a little bit. You just want to give the onions a head start. Okay, so you can cut these however you want. You can do them in rounds, or what my grandmother always used to do was she cut it down the middle and then she did like these half moons. And again, you don't want them too thick, but you also don't want them so thin that they fall apart, because zucchini tends to be a delicate vegetable when it's cooked. So you want it to retain as much of its shape as possible. Okay. And we'll get to the last one here. Okay. All right. So check on our onions here. I guess we could raise this up a little bit more. There is no garlic in this dish. You could put garlic. She never did, so I don't. And I also feel like it would take away, because garlic can tend to be overpowering, especially if you put too much. So I usually don't add the garlic just because that's not how I grew up eating it. But you certainly could. If you love garlic, you can definitely add it. Okay, so you don't want the onions to be brown. You just want them to be sort of starting to turn translucent. And then we are going to add in all of the zucchini. So this was 3. Here. Okay. And again, we're going to do a good pinch of salt. We're going to do black pepper. I'll taste it later, and I'm sure I'll add more red pepper just because we like it. Okay, and at this point, you really just want the zucchini to start to soften up with the onions. And then what you'll do is ladle in the tomato sauce towards the end, just for all the flavors to meld together. And then you'll add the pasta right in here. So that's sort of another reason why I like to use, I know that skillet might seem like a big one, but I like to add the pasta right from the pot into the skillet and finish it in there along with the sauce. You know, gluten-free spaghetti or any gluten-free pasta needs a little bit more hand-holding, if you will, than regular pasta because it tends to clump together. Sometimes I'll actually rinse my gluten-free pasta after it's been cooked just to kind of get like that sticky sort of starch that forms on it off. But in this case, you really don't have to because it's going into a tomato sauce. So it's not that big of a deal. But like when I'm doing a mac and cheese, for example, I usually always rinse the pasta after I cooked it, and then I drain it really, really well. Are there any questions so far or at this point while I'm waiting for this stuff to cook? Okay. And if you have a question about any other dish or gluten-free baking, grain-free baking, feel free. It doesn't only have to be recipes that I'm preparing tonight. No? Okay. Alrighty. So tongs are your best friend when you're working with spaghetti, especially gluten-free spaghetti, because you want to constantly keep it moving. So you break up those clumps that sort of form. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but I did generously salt this pasta cooking water before I started boiling it. That's really important to do. I know some people like to add olive oil to their cooking water. I never have. I usually don't. Thank you, Ava. It smells so delicious in here. Zucchini tends to cook relatively quickly. And you don't want to cook it to the point where it turns to mush. So I'm just going to let it go another minute or two, and then I'll add the sauce in. And I'm not going to add all of the sauce at once. I'll probably just add a couple of ladles worth just to sort of cover the zucchini just barely. And then I'll add a little bit more at the end when I toss the spaghetti in with it. Okay. Let me just, Ava, if you want to. And the other thing too is when I'm doing a pasta this way, gluten-free or otherwise, I never cook it the full way because it's going to continue to cook in your saute pan with whatever sauce it is that you're making. So if I was just serving it with a simple tomato sauce, then I would drain it and then toss it all together at the end, and the pasta would be cooked all the way through. But in this case, I don't cook it all the way. Okay, now I've also added some of that fresh basil from the garden to the tomato sauce. And I'm going to add all of that right in, the basil right along with it. Okay, so that for now should be enough. Okay, lower it down a little bit. You don't want it to be boiling rapidly, but you want to make sure that the zucchini is submerged so that it cooks, because the sauce is going to continue not only to flavor the zucchini, but to cook it through as well. And I'm going to cover this just so that the sauce doesn't evaporate. If you leave it uncovered and it's simmering, it will reduce, which we don't want that to happen here because we want all of that yumminess. Okay. We can take a peek at our tart, which you can see the cheese is starting to melt nicely. Okay. So I'm going to put that back in. And let me check on pasta. I can usually tell just by feeling it if it's done, but no, not even close. So, for my sous chef. A little too hard. I prefer my pasta al dente, but this is a little too hard still. Okay, so we're just gonna hang out at this point. If you had white wine, and I have that here in my notes, but I didn't have white wine, so I didn't add it. But if you happened to have white wine, like a Sauvignon Blanc or a Chardonnay, you could add a splash of that to the zucchini and the onion mixture as well. Just a little bit. It just kind of gives it like a nice acidity, if you will. Georgia, how are we doing?
We're doing good. No questions.
No questions.
Looks and sounds good. Really puts my office meal that I'm eating to shame.
I'm sorry?
I said this puts the office meal that I'm eating to shame.
Well, if you feel like driving over here, I could make you a dish. Alrighty. So this is coming along nicely. And it's a little on the thick side, but that's okay, because when I pull the spaghetti out of the boiling water, some of that cooking liquid will also thin out the sauce a little bit. And when you add the sauce to the zucchini, try to have it hot. I had already heated that up before I started making it. So, okay, let me just see here where we are at. Like I said, you don't want the zucchini to be mushy. I like it like this. It's still got a little tiny bit of a bite to it. It could go another second or two, but it would be totally fine for me because it's not mushy at all. And it also keeps its green color more so. So the less you cook it, the greener it will stay. Okay, so I think we'll take this off. Put that there. All right, let me try not to burn myself. Okay. Give that a little. Okay. So we turned it off. We are just going to, well, it's probably easier. Move this. There we go. Okay. Bless you. Okay. And again, a little bit of the cooking liquid is perfectly fine. Oops. Now I like to finish this with additional basil. Okay, and you just want to sort of, you know, toss the pasta around as you go. And you can see that the zucchini has still kept its shape. It's kept that bright green color, which you want. This was, I think, a 12-ounce package of spaghetti. But this recipe would absolutely work with, you know, a minimum of a pound. You could probably even get away with a little bit more if you had to. I am going to turn this off now. I think I might add a tiny bit more of the cooking water. Just get all the onions and everything. And then you can serve it right out of this bowl, right out of this saute pan if you'd like. You could also serve it individually in individual serving bowls. However you normally serve your pasta, this would be great. This is a really nice dish to make when you're having company over and you're eating outside. Okay, I'm also going to add another little pinch of the crushed red pepper flakes. And then I would also grate additional or Parmesan or Pecorino on top. And you could either do that now and mix it all so it gets a little bit cheesy, or you can keep it on the side and let people add it as they see fit. So that is the pasta dish. And with the exception of having made the sauce ahead of time, in the time that it took the pasta to boil, you pretty much had, you know, the entire dish made. So it's a really simple dish to make. It uses very few ingredients, which is how I like to cook and how I grew up eating. And it features squash, which is in season now and delicious.
Looks really good.
Thanks. Georgia, would you like a plate?
I mean, yes.
Huh?
I said, I mean, yes, but.
I feel so bad that you're not closer. Okay, let me see how this is doing. I don't want to bore you guys waiting for this to be done, but Ava, if you could zoom in. This probably needs a few more minutes. You can see it's starting to get brown on the edges and the cheese is getting really nice and melty and bubbly. See over here, it's nice and brown and everything is setting up nicely. I'm going to leave this in for a few more minutes. But but you know, in the essence of time and whatnot, live TV, if you will, live cooking, I can just, you know, even share a picture with you after this comes out of the oven in a little bit, if you wanted that. At this point, those are the two recipes that I had for tonight. If anybody has any questions at all, feel free. Georgia, I don't know if you want to say anything before we close or.
Let me see. Hold on. First of all, so if anyone has a question, put it in the chat. I have a question though. So are you supposed to serve the tart cold or hot?
I actually prefer to serve it room temperature.
Yeah.
But you absolutely could serve it either way. When you're doing a grain-free crust like that, it's super delicate. So you really don't want to serve it right hot out of the oven. You want to give it time to really cool and continue to set. So I would say my ideal would be to serve it room temperature, but you absolutely could, if you like eating, you know, tarts that are cold, you totally could. It's sort of like a quiche, right? It's always better the next day because it's had time to sit. So when you cut into like a hot quiche, sometimes the egg mixture sort of, you know, comes out a little bit. It's sort of the same concept with this.
Oh, okay. Well, that is good to know.
And this is great because you could make it ahead and slice it. Like I made this over the summer for a get together at my brother's house, and I made it the night before, sliced it into triangles, and we ate it room temperature, and it was great. So it's nice because you can make it ahead.
Yeah, I like anything like that. Because before you go to a party, there's always that rush of like getting ready.
Yes.
For something. It's like, and then I always regret cooking the day of. It's just, yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. My tip, because prior to COVID, I entertained all the time, and I learned over the years that the more I could make ahead of time, the better off I was. You know, some things you just can't because you need to make them right then and there. But you know, even if you can make components of it ahead of time, like make the crust the day before, wrap it and put it in the fridge, and then, you know, it's one less thing that you have to stress out about.
Yeah.
And this tart dough can be frozen as well.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. How long can you freeze it for?
I'm sorry?
How long can you freeze it for?
If it should freeze for, you know, a good month, 2 months or so. Yeah, I mean, beyond that, I haven't let it go much longer than that. But as long as you wrap it well and put it in, you know, like a freezer bag or something, it should be okay. And then thaw it in the refrigerator.
That means you just forgot about it.
Yeah, I know that happens. Sometimes I do those days where I just focus on what I have in my garage, fridge, freezer, and here, and I just try to pull stuff out so I can use what I forgot that I had.
Let me just check and see if there's any last minute questions. No, I think that we're good. Okay, so thank you for everyone who came tonight. Thank you to everyone who will watch this later on. Thank you, Danielle.
You're very welcome.
Salivate. It looked very delicious. I wish I have something to do after this. Otherwise, I would totally drive over to New City and have you do like a little drive-by pickup. But
absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you to you. Thank you to your daughter, Ava. Thank you very much for being the helper. And
Thank you.
I'm going to stop recording.